Jackson Carter constantly reminded himself that he was living the true American dream. At 32 years old, dressed impeccably in a perfectly tailored suit and gleaming leather shoes, he strode confidently down the brightly lit corridors of the New York Supreme Court. As the youngest black prosecutor in the city's history, Jackson had become a symbol of success overcoming prejudice. Every time he appeared in court, all eyes, from admiration to envy, focused on him, but Jackson never wavered. Yet, his real pride was not his stellar career, but Sophia Bennett, the beautiful blonde-haired daughter of one of the city's wealthiest and most influential families. Whenever Jackson and Sophia appeared together at lavish charity events, the envious stares from New York's elite only deepened Jackson's satisfaction. However, behind the luxurious parties and polite smiles lay the cold disapproval of Sophia's family. The Bennetts, conservative and prestigious, never hid their displeasure at their daughter's choice. Jackson ignored it all, believing their love could conquer even the harshest prejudices. Every night, in their luxurious penthouse overlooking the glittering Manhattan skyline, Jackson would hold Sophia close, whispering promises of the perfect future they'd build together, a future no one could deny them. Sophia always responded with a gentle gaze and trusting smile. But when night fell and Sophia drifted off to sleep, Jackson would quietly enter a secure room at the far end of the hallway, a room sealed exclusively by his fingerprint. He'd check his second phone, quickly scanning messages from his trusted associates. Business was booming, high-end prostitution rings and lucrative drug trafficking routes. Jackson smiled coldly as he read the reports. Prosecutor Jackson Carter didn't merely represent justice. He was the embodiment of New York's darkest criminal underworld. Despite the outward politeness, the Bennett family never ceased their suspicions about Jackson. During their strained family gatherings, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett frequently asked subtly pointed questions about his background, past, and even his work. Each seemingly casual inquiry was like a needle puncturing Jackson's pride. He responded with calculated smiles and vague, yet sharp answers, preventing further probing. Sophia always sensed the tension between her parents and the man she loved. Sometimes, after those tense dinners, she would cry in Jackson's arms, begging forgiveness for her parents' insensitivity. Jackson gently wiped away her tears, reassuring her that time would reveal all truths. But deep down, he knew the situation was becoming increasingly precarious. The Bennetts were not easily fooled. One weekend afternoon, as Jackson prepared documents for an upcoming trial, the apartment's doorbell rang insistently. Sophia wasn't home, and Jackson opened the door, immediately chilled by Mr. Bennett's steel blue gaze. Without waiting for an invitation, Mr. Bennett stepped firmly into the living room, followed by Mrs. Bennett, whose eyes were equally piercing. "Jackson, we need to talk," Mr. Bennett said authoritatively. Jackson calmly invited them to sit on the sofa, but Mr. Bennett refused. Staring directly into Jackson's eyes, he spoke slowly and clearly, as if delivering a verdict. "We've investigated you, Jackson. What we've found is disgusting. Prostitution, drugs. How long did you think you could hide this? We're going to the police, but we're giving you the chance to leave Sophia first." Jackson stood motionless, his heart quickening, though his expression remained frozen. He curled his lips into a faint, dangerous smile. "I have no idea what you're talking about, but if you insist on slandering me, you'll regret it." Mr. Bennett stepped closer, his voice taut with anger. "Your threats don't scare me, Jackson. Sophia will never spend her life with someone like you." They quickly left, leaving Jackson alone in the spacious apartment. He sank into a chair, clutching a glass of whiskey, his breath growing uneven. He'd never felt cornered like this before. Silence settled heavily over the apartment. Jackson stared out the window at Manhattan's glittering lights, now seemingly mocking him. He knew his time was running out. If the Bennetts acted, his career, reputation, and everything he had built would vanish instantly. A chilling thought crept into Jackson's mind like a shadow slipping between darkness and light. He knew exactly what he had to do. The choice was clear, though he'd never anticipated facing it so soon. A cold smile crossed his lips as he made his decision. A perfect plan was forming in the young prosecutor's mind, a plan that would permanently remove any obstacles standing in his way. A thick darkness blanketed Manhattan like a heavy black quilt. Inside a black sedan parked discreetly on an isolated street, Jackson Carter sat motionless, eyes as cold as ice, fixed on the luxurious Bennett family mansion. Soft yellow lights inside gave the illusion of tranquility, as if no storm had ever touched their lives. Jackson's watch showed 1:45 a.m. It was time to act. Stepping out of the car, he pulled up the collar of his coat, partially obscuring his face, and swiftly approached the mansion. His hands, concealed by black leather gloves, moved carefully as he slipped through the side gate, already disabled earlier by one of his trusted men. The basement window stood slightly ajar, just enough space for Jackson's athletic frame to slip through undetected. His footsteps made no sound on the expensive carpet as he moved across the spacious living room, a faint fragrance of perfume still lingering in the air. He drew a silenced pistol from his coat pocket, momentarily feeling a slight tremble in his finger before quickly steadying himself. No turning back now, he reminded himself. Jackson ascended the stairs cautiously, heart pounding loudly in his ears. The master bedroom door was slightly ajar, soft breathing emanating from within. He paused briefly, inhaled deeply, and pushed the door open. On the bed, Mr. and Mrs. Bennett lay peacefully asleep, completely unaware that death stood silently at their bedside, his gaze utterly devoid of mercy. A brief hesitation flickered through Jackson's mind as he saw the aging face of the woman who had once greeted him politely when they first met. But the moment passed quickly. Without another second of hesitation, he raised the pistol. Too cold, nearly inaudible shots rang out. The elderly couple briefly jerked, then lay motionless, locked forever in an endless sleep. Jackson didn't hurry away immediately. He calmly staged the scene to appear like a robbery. Jewelry vanished alongside other valuables, and the downstairs window was left open to imply forced entry. At 3 a.m., Jackson returned to his car, started the engine, and quietly drove away. His face was devoid of any tension or anxiety. Only a terrifying calmness remained. When police arrived at the crime scene the next morning, Jackson was notified by a colleague. He arrived at the scene promptly, his face a perfect mask of concern and grief. Sophia collapsed into his arms, sobbing uncontrollably, oblivious to the fact that the comforting hands holding her had just pulled the trigger, ending her parents' lives hours earlier. Under the gloomy morning sky, Jackson played flawlessly the role of a devoted boyfriend grieving alongside Sophia. But deep in his eyes, darkness lingered, a darkness invisible to everyone else. The days following the murders passed in pain and chaos. Sophia, engulfed in grief, became increasingly fragile and reliant on Jackson. He stayed constantly by her side, playing the devoted protector, assisting her in arranging the funeral and managing all legal matters. To the outside world, Jackson appeared the ideal boyfriend, but only he knew the truth. He had executed a perfect murder. Police launched an investigation, but quickly found themselves at a dead end. No fingerprints, no witnesses, surveillance cameras entirely disabled. All they had were a few vague clues and fruitless speculations. Yet, amidst the mourning atmosphere, during fleeting moments of silence, Jackson occasionally noticed Sophia's suspicious gaze. Her blue eyes no longer showed unconditional trust. Instead, they held a quiet suspicion, a shadow of unease. Jackson knew that Sophia wasn't ready to accept her parents' death as just a random robbery gone wrong. Late one night, while Sophia slept deeply, aided by sedatives, Jackson quietly opened her laptop. The screen illuminated his face, pale and cold. Scanning quickly through her search history, he felt a sharp jolt as he discovered Sophia had been researching similar cases, police investigative methods, and prominent private detective agencies in New York. Jackson leaned back in the chair, eyes fixed on the computer screen. Anxiety, a feeling he'd thought banished forever, rose unexpectedly and powerfully within him. Sophia was starting to doubt him, presenting a risk he could not ignore. He sighed, carefully closed the laptop, and returned to bed. Looking at Sophia's peaceful sleeping face caused him a sharp pang. Jackson didn't want to hurt her, but if she persisted, his choices would quickly narrow. The next morning, Jackson resumed his role as the perfect boyfriend. He accompanied Sophia to church, held her hand throughout the funeral, and gently wiped tears from her face as she broke down over memories of her parents. Everything unfolded perfectly, like a carefully staged play. But Jackson knew his carefully constructed facade was beginning to crack. Sophia was no longer the naive girl easily deceived. The fragments of his seemingly flawless crime were gradually being pieced together, bit by bit, by the woman he loved most, the one he never imagined would become his most dangerous adversary. As time passed, the surface of their lives gradually returned to a facade of normalcy. Yet beneath this fragile tranquility, a silent war was unfolding between Jackson and Sophia. Sophia, her grief transforming into determination, secretly launched her own investigation. She carefully hid her suspicions and fears, letting no one else in on her thoughts. Jackson continued his perfect performance, but now every move and word from Sophia was analyzed meticulously. He noticed subtle shifts in her demeanor. Forced smiles, brief, oddly hushed phone conversations, and the occasional piercing gaze that seemed determined to penetrate his soul. One evening, Sophia returned home later than usual. Jackson sat quietly on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand, closely watching her. She hastily explained she'd met an old college friend, but Jackson detected the slight tremor in her voice. The next day, after Sophia left home, Jackson silently followed her. From afar, he saw her enter a small cafe downtown, where she met an unfamiliar man. They exchanged documents, talking with grave seriousness. Jackson tightened his grip on the steering wheel, his eyes darkening with realization. A private detective. Sophia was looking for evidence. Immediately, a new plan began forming in Jackson's mind. He couldn't keep pretending everything was fine. Sophia had gone too far. He knew he had to extinguish this dangerous spark before it spread. A few days later, shocking news swept through the city. The renowned private investigator had been found dead under suspicious circumstances in his apartment. Authorities concluded it was suicide, but when Sophia heard the news, her face turned pale, eyes filled with profound fear. She glanced at Jackson, who pretended to read the newspaper beside her, and in that instant, she knew she was dangerously close to the real killer. Sophia hurried into the bedroom, struggling to calm herself as her heart pounded violently. A horrifying realization settled within her. The man she loved most, the man she relied upon, was the ruthless monster who had taken away everything precious in her life. In the living room, Jackson slowly put down the newspaper, his cold gaze fixed on the closed bedroom door. He sighed quietly, knowing that from this moment forward, their deadly game had reached its most critical point. He had no choice left but to continue eliminating anyone who stood in his way, even if that meant Sophia, the only woman he had ever truly loved. The relationship between Jackson and Sophia grew increasingly strained. Their conversations became sparse, their eyes avoiding each other in the very home that once echoed with laughter and happiness. Sophia began to fear Jackson's presence, though she desperately tried to hide it, knowing that if he suspected she'd uncovered his secret, her life would become dangerously fragile. Jackson missed nothing in Sophia's behavior. Every suspicious glance, every innocent question haunted his nights with sleepless anxiety. He felt a growing fear within himself, fear that the woman he loved would destroy everything he'd carefully built. Late one night, as Sophia lay sleeping, Jackson once again opened his secret phone, checking messages from his trusted associates. The message he read made his blood run cold. The police were discreetly reopening the Bennett murder investigation due to new suspicions raised by an anonymous informant. Jackson's blood froze. The anonymous source could only be Sophia. He clenched the phone tightly, his cold, ruthless eyes fixed on her sleeping form. Sophia appeared calm and innocent, causing him sharp pain. Jackson knew at that moment there was no turning back. The next morning, Sophia woke in an empty house. Jackson had already left. Her heart raced anxiously when she noticed the brief note he'd left on the table. "I have some business to handle. I'll be back late tonight. Love you." Sophia felt instantly uneasy. Hastily gathering her belongings, she decided to leave the apartment immediately. But as soon as she stepped outside, she spotted an unfamiliar car parked directly in front of their building, two men inside watching her intently. It was clear she was being followed. Terrified, Sophia hurried back inside and locked the door tightly behind her. She collapsed onto the floor, tears streaming down her pale face. Everything became clear. Jackson knew she'd discovered the truth and would not let her escape. Across the city, Jackson sat quietly in a secret room, dim lights illuminating his tense face. His phone buzzed constantly with updates on Sophia's movements. He knew she was panicking, but he had no other choice. He convinced himself that Sophia had forced his hand. She had pushed him into this devastating decision. Jackson stood up, adjusted his jacket, and glanced one last time into the mirror. He exhaled heavily, accepting the grim reality that today he would have to end the life of the woman he had once truly loved. His hand trembled slightly as he fastened his buttons, but the cold determination in his eyes remained as steady as when he'd committed his previous murders. Sophia sat motionless in her locked apartment as the shadows of evening slowly enveloped every corner, filling her with an overwhelming sense of dread. Glancing through the window, she noticed the unfamiliar car still patiently parked outside, like a predator waiting quietly for its prey. Sophia realized with chilling clarity that she was trapped inside the place that had once been their safe haven. Her mind raced chaotically, yet she forced herself to regain composure. She couldn't let Jackson control her fear. Clutching her phone tightly, she finally made the call she'd been delaying out of sheer terror. The voice on the other end was firm and authoritative. Chief Mason speaking. Sophia took a deep, shaky breath and spoke. "I know who killed my parents. He's planning to kill me too." While Sophia nervously recounted every detail to Chief Mason, Jackson was busy implementing his own plan across town. He anticipated Sophia contacting the police. That was part of his calculated gamble. He was ready for anything. This deadly game would end tonight. That evening, Sophia received a message from Jackson. "I'm on my way home. Don't go anywhere. We need to talk." Her heart raced uncontrollably, fear gripping her throat like an invisible hand. But this time, Sophia wasn't alone. Police officers had discreetly surrounded the apartment, waiting for Jackson to slip up. An hour later, she heard the front door unlock. Jackson stepped inside, his face eerily calm. Sophia stood frozen, desperately trying to maintain composure. "I know you've spoken to the police," Jackson said softly, his cold eyes locked onto hers. "You've disappointed me, Sophia." Sophia trembled but managed to speak calmly. "You killed my parents, Jackson. How could you?" Jackson sighed, his gaze briefly flickering with regret. "I didn't want things to end this way. Your parents forced my hand, and now, so have you." He reached into his jacket, about to pull out his gun. But at that precise moment, the door burst open and police officers stormed in, weapons aimed directly at Jackson. "Jackson Carter, drop your weapon immediately," Chief Mason commanded with authority. Jackson stood frozen, his eyes darting quickly from Sophia to the police and back to Sophia again, his expression revealing genuine panic and despair for the first time. Slowly, he dropped the gun onto the floor, his cold facade finally shattering. Sophia stepped back, tears streaming down her face, relief mingled with deep pain. The man she had once trusted and loved more than anyone else was now a stranger, handcuffed and escorted out by the police. The deadly game had finally reached its dramatic conclusion, but Sophia knew the wounds Jackson left behind would never truly heal. Jackson sat motionless in the cold interrogation room, the harsh fluorescent lights casting a stark glow on his exhausted, haggard face. His once immaculate suit was now wrinkled and stained. He stared intently into the one-way mirror, fully aware that on the other side, multiple pairs of eyes were carefully scrutinizing every subtle movement and expression he made. The door opened, and Chief Mason entered, followed closely by a young detective carrying a thick case file. Mason took a seat directly across from Jackson, his sharp eyes fixed firmly on the man who had once embodied the law. "You used to represent justice, Jackson," Mason began, disappointment heavy in his voice. "It's unbelievable that you're behind these brutal crimes." Jackson remained silent for a long moment, then softly laughed, a bitter, chilling sound echoing through the Stark room. "Justice?" he whispered cynically. "Justice was just my mask, Chief. I've lived behind that mask my whole life." Mason shook his head, genuine sorrow in his voice. "But why, Jackson? You had everything, a career, prestige, the genuine love of an innocent woman. Why destroy it all with your own hands?" Jackson lowered his head, staring at his trembling hands on the table. His voice turned bitter, tinged with deep regret. "Once you step into darkness, you can't easily step out. I thought I could control everything. But the more I tried to grasp it, the more I lost control." The interrogation dragged on for hours. Gradually, Jackson confessed to each of his crimes. Every admission was like a knife slicing deeper into his soul, peeling away layers of the carefully constructed facade he'd built over the years. Secrets about the prostitution rings, drug operations, and murders slowly surfaced, plunging the interrogation room in a heavy silence. On the opposite side of the mirrored glass, Sophia watched silently, tears streaming down her pale face. Her heart shattered anew with each cold confession uttered by the man she had given her entire heart to. She realized that no matter the punishment Jackson faced, the wounds inside her would never truly heal. Eventually, Jackson raised his head, staring directly into the mirror, as if he could clearly see Sophia standing on the other side. "I'm sorry, Sophia," he whispered softly, his voice trembling for the first time since his arrest. "I never wanted you to suffer like this." Chief Mason rose slowly, signaling the end of the interrogation. As the door closed behind them, Jackson collapsed forward, all the false strength he'd ever shown dissolving in an instant. He knew his life had effectively ended the moment he chose crime over love and justice. In the suffocating darkness of that cold interrogation room, Jackson understood with bitter clarity. It was his own hands that had destroyed the American dream he had desperately pursued his entire life. Jackson Carter's trial drew unprecedented attention in the history of New York's judicial system. Media crowded the courthouse steps, cameras flashing relentlessly each time Jackson was escorted into the courtroom. Those who had once admired him now stared with a mix of contempt and painful disappointment. Throughout the proceedings, Jackson sat silently, his weary eyes staring straight ahead, rarely betraying any emotion. He refused defense attorneys and admitted openly to every heinous crime he had committed, plunging the courtroom into an eerie, chilling silence. Sophia attended the trial as well, sitting behind the witness row. Each confession Jackson made was another knife driven into her heart. Yet she remained there, strong and resolute, determined to watch as justice was served upon the man who had destroyed her life. The prosecutor, who had once been Jackson's close colleague and friend, could hardly conceal his anguish as he stated, "Jackson Carter, once a representative of law and justice, betrayed the very ideals he vowed to uphold. He is not only a murderer, but also a man who shattered public trust in the legal system." The jury deliberated for less than an hour before delivering their verdict. A haunting silence filled the courtroom as the judge declared, "Jackson Carter, you're sentenced to death for the severity of the crimes you have committed." A sob echoed from the back of the room. Sophia lowered her head, fighting to maintain the last of her strength. Jackson glanced toward her one final time, his eyes, for the first time, showing clear anguish and profound remorse. As Jackson was led away from the courtroom, his steps were heavy, as if weighed down by the burden of his guilt. The door slammed shut behind him, a sound marking the definitive end to his once glorious life. The American dream had shattered irreparably into sharp, irreconcilable pieces. Jackson's final days in solitary confinement forced him to confront himself directly, with nowhere to hide, nowhere to run. He thought of Sophia, of his tragic choices, and all he had once possessed and subsequently destroyed. In that isolation and darkness, Jackson realized his greatest enemy had never been the police, nor the Bennetts, nor Sophia herself, but his own insatiable greed and twisted ego. Waiting in cold solitude for the day of execution, Jackson understood this was the ultimate price he had to pay, a death sentence for a man who had once been called a prosecutor, yet betrayed the very justice he swore to protect. The day of execution finally arrived. Inside the cold isolation cell, Jackson sat silently, hands tightly clasped, eyes vacant and fixed on the gray floor. Memories flooded over him, his past successes, his seemingly eternal love with Sophia, and all the horrific crimes he had committed. The cell door opened softly. The prison guard stepped inside and gently announced, "It's time, Carter." Jackson rose slowly, his legs suddenly unbearably heavy. Each step forward felt burdened with the invisible weight of guilt-ridden memories. The long, starkly lit corridor stretched out ahead like an inescapable path leading directly toward his inevitable fate. In the viewing chamber, Sophia sat quietly, her face worn and filled with deep sorrow. As Jackson entered the execution room, their eyes met one final time. Sophia's gaze remained deeply wounded, yet held an unexpected sense of calm, as if she had finally found a small measure of peace. Jackson took his place in the execution chair. As the guard secured him with the restraining straps, a priest approached gently, asking quietly, "Do you have any final words, Jackson?" He paused for a moment, then nodded slowly. His gaze locked onto Sophia, his voice trembling yet clear. "Sophia, I'm so sorry. I destroyed your life and shattered everything good I ever had. I thought I could control the darkness, but in the end, it swallowed me whole." Jackson's eyes filled with tears for the first time in his proud, cold life. "I'm sorry to your parents, to you, and even to myself," he continued, his voice breaking with profound remorse. "If there is a next life, I hope you never meet someone like me again." Sophia nodded slightly, tears silently streaming down her cheeks. Jackson closed his eyes, feeling an unexpected relief now that he had finally confronted his sins honestly. The final moment was quicker and gentler than he had imagined. In those last seconds, Jackson's mind was no longer filled with sinister plots or ruthless coldness. Instead, he saw Sophia clearly, the innocent smile from their first meeting, her comforting embrace, and the genuine trust he had ruthlessly betrayed. Then everything faded into darkness. After Jackson's death, Sophia left New York, attempting to rebuild her life in another city. Yet the scars Jackson left behind continued to haunt her every day. She never forgot and never fully forgave the man she had once wholeheartedly loved. As for New York City, the story of the talented young black prosecutor who betrayed justice became a grim lesson about greed, corruption, and the steep price one pays when losing oneself to darkness. The American dream Jackson Carter had once pursued so passionately had ultimately ended in tragedy, an unforgettable cautionary tale no one wished to see repeated.